Trying out something new here. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats with me, Phil the Glacial Geek. Today I am going to be continuing to paint up my my newest edition, the Sanguinary Guard that I've been working on. Trying to give myself a little bit of an extra bump with my competitive lists. I think that the extra punch that these guys can provide is going to work really well with the extra shooty that my Dark Angels can provide. And these guys are pretty cool. I've gotten 5 of them built so far out of the other ones that are coming. So I've got these guys here. So far I've done 2 fists, I've done 2 swords, and I've got an axe. And then the other set, I'm going to do the ancient in it, and then I'm going to have another fist and one more fist, 1 more axe, and another 2 swords. So I'll have a total of 4 swords, 3 fists, and 2 axes, and then I'm going to have the Sanguinary Ancient. So that should be 3 elite choices, which would be nice. And then I've got my Slamguinius right here, Captain Slamguinius. He's basically just a captain with a jump pack, a Thunderhammer, a Storm Shield, but all the extra bits and nobbins that you can give him with as a Blood Angel. I'm going to have to get used to saying that. As a Blood Angel is pretty makes him pretty strong. So that's what I'm going to be working on, is painting up these guys, continue to paint up. I've got, as you can see, I did 2 different primers. So I did black on most of them, and then I did my light gray primer on the wings and on these little white, the white shoulder bits things, because that's what I'm going to be painting them in as, those ones as white. So I'm going to continue doing my base coats. I've got the gold on all of them done. I've got most of the red I'm looking at. I think I missed a few pieces. I might have to go back and do some touch-ups with the red, and then I'll go and clean everything up. Then I'll do my washes, and then I'll do some final detail stuff. So that's the plan. That's what I'm going to be working on hobby-wise today. As far as the discussion is going to be going on, I'm going to be talking about the FAQs and what we keep getting with the FAQs. There's a lot of people that are anxiously awaiting the new one that's coming out. And there's a lot of people that have very strong opinions one way or the other when it comes to the FAQ and all the different FAQs that have been coming out with the system. A lot of people say, it's like, why didn't you just get it right the first time? And a lot of other people saying, you know, I really appreciate that they're keeping up with the system and making sure that things are, you know, handled right and make sure the game is taken care of. So basic thing is that I want to talk about why they're doing the FAQs. So the FAQs have consisted of a few different things. One aspect of it is clarifying rules in the books and in the game that confuse people or that cause disagreements. So, for instance, with the Dark Angels, after the Dark Angels book came out, there was some disagreements as to whether or not Speed of the Raven, for instance, would work with assault weapons. So that would you have the -1 for shooting assault weapons? There were a lot of people that very strongly felt that you don't ignore that that penalty. I called names because I thought that it did. I didn't see why it would. They would choose out assault weapons versus any other heavy or rapid fire weapons to have a negative penalty on them versus anyone else. To me, it seemed obvious, but to them, it also seemed obvious that they are advancing, so they don't get to ignore that -1 penalty to assault weapons. So they came out in the FAQ and answered that and said that basically you shoot everything normal, and that's fine. You know, they came out and clarified an issue with the rules. I mean, there have been issues with interpreting rules. It's not just 8th edition. This has been for every single edition. People had disagreements as to what is intended. You know, there's also rules as written versus rules as intended. RAW versus RAI. And there's also a lot of discussion as to there was a bunch of different things. You know, there was the whether or not Mind Wipe could stack if you can cast it twice onto the same model. People had discussions with that, so the FAQ came out and clarified that. So that's one aspect of what the FAQs do. Another aspect is that they can adjust the points cost of units. So Say they came out and they said they've done this a couple times. So they had it with, Malefic Lords. They've done it with conscripts. They've done it with gene stealers, pure strains. What they do is they basically come out and they change the entry in the codex or the index, whatever it might be, to change the point value either higher or lower depending upon what they perceive to be needed. So, there's a lot of units that when they first come out in the codex or the index are a little overcosted or a little undercosted for what they can do. So the ones that are undercosted often get, you'll see 1 billion of them in a tournament, or you see 1 billion of them in a list. Whereas if it's overcosted, you just won't see them at all. You're just not going to see them come up on the table. So they've used the FAQs to adjust the point values for models as well. So to keep them more in line with each other, so that units don't become if units are too cheap for what they can do, you're just going to see a lot of them, and it imbalances the game. So they use this as a form of balance. So units that get abused a lot usually tend to go up in price. Units that you just never see on the board tend to go down in price. All of them, within reason, or I guess in my opinion, reason. It's usually a couple points each. You don't see some major drastic changes, but that's just kind of the way it is. That you see these adjustments in point costs, so that units can then can be readjusted and rebalanced to other units that either come out or other units that are already out, and they just perceive an issue with it. They also use the FAQs to change certain rules. So they've put out different rulings, such as boots on the ground, that comes out so that flyers can't hold objectives anymore. Those kind of things where they've changed, made changes to rules. So they've changed the character rule when they came out with chapter approved. They also change certain rulings within the book, so that different units can or cannot use certain aspects, things like that. They just have general just changes to rules that they do from time to time, which works pretty well for balancing it. And the third thing that they do in these FAQs is they answer questions. So if people have questions such as, can I use Auspex scan, or does a unit count as moving when they use a rule like to jump? What does that count as? And they came out and they'll answer it, and they'll give you explanations for it, or sometimes they just answer it straight up, yes or no. So yeah, FAQ stands for frequently asked questions. So that's a major aspect of it is these questions, but a lot of what people look for are these rules clarifications, rules adjustments, and points adjustments. Points adjustments has become the big thing that people have worried about, talking about. That's what they come out with, like the nerf hammers, they call it, where a unit might get a whole lot more expensive to use, and therefore become less viable for the tactics that they were being used for before the FAQ came out. So with that in mind, you have the question as to what was truly intended with these. When they change things like that, is it nerfing them, or is it just taking them back into a balance that they were supposed to have from the beginning? So that's always the argument: is do they use these FAQs to nerf units, or are they using these FAQs to try to rebalance the game? And should they try to rebalance the game, or should they just leave it the way it is? Should they have gotten it right the first time? And in my opinion, I think that these FAQs are an answer to what the community has asked for many editions. I think they're a fantastic step forward. And I get the arguments, people saying it's like, if I'm paying money for a book, it should be right. But the problem is that a lot of times, even if you have playtesters, which they did for 8th edition, they don't have thousands of playtesters, because when you actually release the game out into the public, you have thousands of people that are looking to try to take advantage of every single rule and every single unit in those books. And that's when you end up with the issues. And when you get so many eyes on it, that's when you start to have miss different interpretations. Because if you wrote the rules and you have someone who you know or that's that's reading the rules, they're going to read it one way, and they're going to read it however they see it. And if those two ways of reading it coincide, they don't perceive an issue with it. But once you put it out into the general public, that's when you start to get a lot more eyes on it, and a lot more interpretations, and a lot more attempts at using them in different ways. You know, and they may be the right way, they may be the wrong way, but the point is that you get a lot more eyes on it. So once anything goes public, it doesn't matter how many times you play tested it, you're probably going to get a lot of situations and questions and interpretations that come up that never would have come up in playtesting, regardless of how extensive your playtesting may have been. So in previous editions, when those things would come up, you were left to just argue it out and try to come to a conclusion. And oftentimes those conclusions wouldn't be, it was one way or the other. Like, you couldn't find like a happy middle ground, and most of the time you would just have to, you know, roll off for it and have to go with that. So that's just kind of the situation that you were left with, is that you were either, no one's going to be happy with that, and there was no affirmative, there was no official answer that you could get one way or the other to kind of solve the argument. You know, you didn't have any higher authority because GW just didn't answer. They didn't put out FAQs. They didn't interpret things. They left it out there. There was no interaction, and that was the biggest complaint that people had about GW. Even more so than the price of the models, which everyone complains about. People had issues with the fact that GW just didn't seem to care about the game that they were producing, you know, and they would come out and they say, you know, we're a model company, not a gaming company. You know, the game's just there to sell models. You know, you do what you want to do. We're not involved with this. We put out the rules. You do what you're going to do with them. And it left a lot of people feeling very upset because, you know, you're investing in this whole game, you're investing in this system, and suddenly you have the producers of that system coming out and saying, you know, we're not involved anymore. You've bought it. It's yours. Have fun. And if you have this disagreement with your friends, you don't want to be arguing with your friends. That's not the point of playing these games, is not to argue with your friends. The point of these games is to have fun and enjoy yourselves. And if you don't have some kind of larger authority come out and make a decision one way or the other that you can live with, you're stuck, you know? And that's what you were left with in previous editions of Warhammer. So with 8th edition coming out, and actually it's towards the end of 7th edition, but now especially with 8th edition, they've been coming out with a lot of FAQs. And you hear people complaining about, you know, it's like, oh, now I've got to bring all these pieces of paper, and now I've got to know what all these different things happen. And it's, yeah, I can understand that. I understand trying to keep on top of all these FAQs is tough, but it's part of the game. You know, if you're going to go to a tournament and you've got your army, check the latest FAQs. See if anything's changed from what you remember, or from what you had in the materials that you own. Because odds are something probably may have changed, and just going into it with that little bit of information is going to be helpful. You know, have it downloaded on your phone, print it out, or just look at it on your computer and then know about it. And then if someone needs to, you guys can look it up if it becomes an issue. But it shouldn't become an issue, because at that point an FAQ becomes part of the rules. And you know, people need to know what's going on with their army. And I get that you don't want to have to run around with a binder full of printed out pieces of paper. You just want to have the one book. But the other option is that you have situations that weren't perceived before printing that now exist in your book without an answer, and you're left to either just sit there and argue with your opponent over it, thus taking away from the fun of the game, or have to just turn to a TO who's just making his own opinion on it versus some kind of higher authority. Because if GW comes out, even if you disagree with their interpretation, I mean, they're the makers of the game. And if they come out and say one thing, that's just kind of the way it is. You go with that and you live with that. Just like any bit of their rules. You know, people disagree with all sorts of different things about how different weapons work and how they should work and how they don't work and how they shouldn't work. But at the end of the day, GW, when they come out and they say, this is how it works, that's how it works. And you live with it and you move with it and you know, continue playing with it, or you just don't play. So having an official FAQ helps solve a lot of those questions and a lot of those problems. I think you have. I think it's been a bit of an FAQ overload, and I think that's what's causing a lot of people strife. Is that they came out with a whole new system. You know, basically, 8th edition, other than in name, essentially has very little other than in name and in some of the not even in the base mechanics, some in the name and a lot of the I guess the names of the base stats. You have similarities to previous editions, but it's a very different system. It's a very new. It's a new system. It's a new game. They've got new rules that are going on. They've got new mechanics that are going on. And with all of these, it means that when you're coming out with a whole brand new system, you're gonna have hiccups and you're gonna have issues that are gonna arise. And part of that is going to and in previous iterations. Games Workshop would have just sat back and been like, well, enjoy, have fun with whatever this is that we've just created, and, you know, best of luck trying to figure out how it's supposed to be done, you know? And that's what you were left with, was to just sit back and just either deal with what they have, argue it out, ask a different person to give you an understanding so you can continue playing with your friend and not have any hard feelings, or you would just, you know, avoid those situations. And now you have a brand new game that's coming out. It's going to have its hiccups, but GW has shown itself willing and able to answer those issues that have come up. You know, they had playtesters, but it's still a brand new system that needed to have the kinks worked out. And you were never going to have as many people playing the game as you do when you release it with playtesters. And because of that fact, a lot of things have come out that once it went public, that GW and his playtesters didn't foresee happening, which is understandable. You know, when you don't foresee it happening, you don't see it coming. I mean, there's only so many games that you could play with it before it gets released. And if you know, it's unreasonable to expect them to have discovered every single hiccup and different interpretation of the rule before the game comes out, because the rules writers, when they write the rules, understand it. They know what it's meant to do. They know the intent of those rules right when they make it. To them, there's no question as to what it means, you know, because they know in their brains what it means, has to mean. So then this edition, before, other than unlike previous editions, they've been having playtesters who have read the rules and played with the rules and had interpretations, and they've answered some of those questions. And to be fair, I think it's been pretty smooth. There have been some issues that have popped up, but a lot of those issues that pop up have then been answered in FAQs. And that's the whole point of the FAQ, is to clarify these things that they haven't done in the past, which is why I think they're fantastic for the game. They keep it living, they keep it alive, and they keep it relevant, so that you don't have these major issues that pop up that keep people questioning and wondering. You know, there's no endless debates about rules once an FAQ comes out. You know, right when a rule book comes out, there's a lot of people reading it, a lot of people understanding trying to understand the rules, and with those understandings, they come to arguments about interpretations as to what is meant by it, what is just written, how things can be done. So then once those new interpretations and those arguments arise, those questions get sent off to GW, and GW now answers them, where in the past they just ignored them, and you were just left with endless threads of arguments as to how things interacted, how things changed, and how things were supposed to be done. In the past, you were just left with an endless thread of comments talking about what they think, what different people think, with no definitive answer. Whereas now, I think you do have a definitive answer, and it ends arguments, is what it does. It ends arguments. There's not a single thread on the Dark Angels pages anymore talking about how Speed of the Raven interacts, because they answered it in their FAQ. And because of that, that's no longer an issue. That doesn't pop up. That doesn't come up. It's not a piece of debate anymore, because there's a definitive answer. So if someone comes up and tries to play it the different way, or says that it's supposed to be played a different way, you can now turn to the FAQ and say, nope, that's not the way it is. GW has come out and said this is what it's supposed to be done. And now you have an answer. So it stops arguments. So the sheer fact that these FAQs stop arguments, in my opinion, makes them great. That alone makes them great. You know, I really enjoy the fact that they help clarify things. I really enjoy the fact that it helps, that they've been using them to try to rebalance situations that have arisen in the game. But the thing that I like most is that they've ended arguments. Back in 7th edition, there was endless debates about how different things interact, what things are supposed to be done, and things like that. That just wouldn't have an answer. You would just have people getting upset, people getting, angry back and forth, trying to figure out, trying to defend their position on it. And back then, you just had to deal with it, or you would either leave it and just not deal with the people that you're having these arguments with, or you would just have to let it go and move on, or you just never got an answer. You know what I mean? You just have these situations that just would continue to sit there forever. And if there's a disagreement between you and the person that you play most often with, that's tough. That's really tough. And what you could do is you could roll the dice and do a 3-up or like a 4-up. Someone gets their interpretation to go with, which is one way to do it, but that doesn't definitively answer the question. And the next time it comes up, you've got to roll the dice again, and there's no consistency to that. Now you get consistency because you get an FAQ decision that stops the arguments and allows you to keep playing the game, which is the whole reason we're doing this. I don't do Warhammer for arguments. I do Warhammer because of the game, because of the hobby, because of being able to play the game that I enjoy and play with my army the way I want to play with it. And if I know what the rules are, I can play with the army, till the cows come home without having to have arguments. And the less arguments I have on the gaming table, the better experience I have on the gaming table. So these FAQs ending arguments in and of themselves are worth their weight in gold, in my opinion, because they just answer it one way or the other, whether I agree with the interpretation that they go with or not. That's the way you have an answer, you go with it. You go with that higher authority, you go with the game writers. And that's always been an issue too, is that back in 7th edition, ITC came out with their own FAQ to change certain rules or interpret different rules to try to address some of the issues with balance that they saw in there. And they would come out and they would have their own rules FAQs when new books would come out to say how different things would be played in ITC games. But that was ITC, and there was a lot of people who didn't want to play with the ITC FAQ with their changes that they made, and it wasn't an overall authority. It was an authority that you could go with, and if you agreed to do ITC, you could go with their interpretation, but it wasn't GW. Now that GW is putting out these FAQs, there's no one that really argues about it, and ITC's happy enough to just go along with the GW FAQs. I mean, I think they've been part of the playtesters and the readers that that kind of see the rules as they're coming out beforehand. But now they get to see. But now you get to see them when they're coming out with this stuff. Is that you now have GW come out and say it, and there's no one that can argue, well, I don't agree with GW's FAQ, so I'm not going to go with it. I mean, good luck. That means you're just not listening to the rules of the game. When GW comes out with an FAQ, it becomes rules of the game. You know what I mean? It becomes the actual. It's just like it's as good as the basic rulebook. It's as good as a codex. It's as good as any of those things that they come out with, because it becomes part of the intrinsic basic rules of Warhammer. So there's no real arguing over, who has the ability to make those calls, who has the ability to have that say. Because that was always another thing in 7th edition. It was like, well, my local TO ruled this. And a lot of people say that's good for your local TO. That's just his opinion. That's not the way I have to play it. That's not the way I have to go with it. But now, if GW comes out and says it, you got to play it that way. That's just the way you got to play it. So, yeah, I think that in the end, these FAQs are an answer to questions that the community has had for a long time. And I don't mean just the actual physical questions. I mean, this is something that the community has called for a long time, is having Games Workshop involvement within the hobby, and not just in the model making, and not just in putting out rules that just sit there forever. They're intrinsically involved in the growing of the community, and they're also intrinsically involved in making sure that the rules are as balanced as possible, as streamlined as possible, and that any issues that are coming up are getting answered. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. They're new. At the beginning of 8th edition, there was a lot of FAQs coming out. They're kind of coming out hodgepodge and leaving people with a lot of questions about when things were going to come out. But they've now come out with the system where they're going to have the main push and FAQ is going. The big FAQs are going to come with chapter approved in December, and then in March they're going to have one. I guess this latest one has been pushed back a bit because of Adepticon, so they might end up pushing back the schedule a bit to make sure that when this kind of stuff happens, it's not going to be conflicting with a major tournament. But they've pushed back the timeline for this one. But it's 2 major FAQs a year that are going to deal with general game balance, that are also going to deal with larger questions that come up. And then they're going to come out with an FAQ for each of the codexes about 2 weeks, they said, after each codex comes out. And most of the times now, there haven't been a whole lot of questions that have come up about the the codexes that have been coming out. Those questions kind of came out from those questions kind of come up and get handled pretty simply. Like as the codexes have come out, there's only really a handful of questions, a handful of issues that arise. And if they're answered in 2 weeks, it doesn't really affect a whole lot. You might get some people that get salty and call other people names because of their interpretation for it in those 2 weeks. But after that, you get an answer one way or the other, and you move on with your lives. And that's pretty fantastic. I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it really helps keep the game going and keeps the game flowing. And that's the whole idea is I think with 8th editions, they want it to be a living rule set. Whereas before it was, like I said, they came out with the rules, that was it until they came out with a new edition. Good luck. Best of luck with your interpretations, best of luck with dealing with whatever's been written. Good luck. Now they're having these FAQs, they're having these questions, they have these adjustments with points, with rules, with the way things interact, and all of these things can get addressed, and all of these things can get taken care of in a timely manner. And now that they have a schedule for when these things are coming out, they're happening in an understandable time frame. So if you have a new book that comes out 2 weeks later, you're probably going to have an FAQ that is going to address any issues that have arisen. Because in 2 weeks, you're probably going to have most of the issues arise early. You know what I mean? Most of these issues don't arise later on down the road. Most of these issues have arisen right off the bat. And once those questions get answered, they've clarified the way the rules work. They've clarified the way rules interact. They clarify what everything does in that book, and now you can move on using that book. There are always going to be unforeseen interactions that arise, and those kind of things get addressed in the FAQs. And if they don't get addressed right away, then now they have this bi-yearly FAQ system that's going to come up to address all of those issues, which I think is fantastic. So I think the FAQs are great for this game. I think they are a step forward for GW in addressing a lot of the complaints that people have had about them and about the system previously in previous editions. I think they've made 8th edition probably one of the most viable editions that they've had, just because of the fact that they've cut back on a lot of the salt. There's an answer. Whether you like it or not, there's an answer, and you move on with your life. And being able to move on with your life one way or the other is going to increase your happiness with the system tenfold. Because if you disagree with a ruling, or you just don't like the way a ruling goes, you just move on because that's part of the rules. It's just like anything else that you play. If you don't like someone winning on the river, but that's just the way the game works. If they pull that card on the river, they win that hand of poker. You don't sit there and just gripe about it. You have an answer. That's the way the rules are. That's the way they go. So now GW has a way of being able to adjust the rules and adjust the basic rules, adjust the intrinsic rules without having to leave it up to other people to set up different systems like an ITC FAQ. It allows them to handle it from right from the horse's mouth. They've got it right there, and they've got an answer that comes from GW, and you go with that answer. And I haven't seen anyone that's argued about going with GW's answers. Once GW comes out with an answer, the arguments stop. People might gripe about not liking the way things are, but not a single person gripes about not playing it the way it is. And I think that's fantastic. And because of that, it's cut back on a lot of the arguments that I end up having in online or in person at the table, whatever it is, it's cut back on those. And one of the things that I said I loved about 8th edition itself was that they streamlined a lot of the mechanics that caused disagreements. So there's no more scatter, which always caused disagreements. There's no more deep strike mishaps. There's no more template issues. All of those things were things that caused strife at on my tables. That didn't happen every time. It didn't happen in every single game, but it would happen. So people, you're not pointing the ruler the correct direction from the scatter dice. No, you're not. That's not 9 inches. No, that does fit in. No, it can't fit in. That's got 4 people underneath the template. No, it's got 3 people under the template. Whatever those arguments were, 8th edition solved them. They took out all of those arguments. And because of that, the game felt more fun. I had a lot more fun with it. And these FAQs are taking it one step further, where there used to be rules disagreements, rules arguments, rules interpretations issues. It would just be an endless argument back and forth, people putting up their defense and their and trying to say the way that they thought it should be interpreted, but there was no answer. Now there's an answer, which means that more arguments are being ended, more arguments are being solved. And that makes for a much more enjoyable game, in my opinion. And because of that, I love these FAQs. I think they're great. Keeping up with them is not always the easiest, but at the same time, it's way better than having these questions arise that have no answer. Because if you didn't have those pieces of paper that you could turn to with an answer, you had no answer, and you were just left to argue with your opponent on the table, which means that you have less time enjoying the game, less time moving models, less time rolling dice, more time just arguing. And arguing is not fun. It's not fun. Unless you're in debate, arguing is not fun. Arguing in a game store, arguing at a game table takes away from the enjoyment of the game. Even if you win your argument, it still took away from the enjoyment. So that's my thoughts, is that these FAQs are probably one of the best step forwards for GW and one of the best step forwards for Warhammer that this new edition has brought forth. And I look forward to them continuing to do so in the future with all these, because I think it's going to really make 8th edition into something that's fantastic. And so far, it's kept things streamlined, it's kept things going and flowing well, which is what's important. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Let me know what your thoughts are. I know a lot of people have different thoughts than mine, but let me know what you think about the new system of FAQs, whether they're going too far in your opinion, or maybe not far enough. Maybe they should have like a monthly FAQ in your opinion. What's your thoughts? Did you like it previously when they just didn't say anything and it was just up to everyone else to figure out their own answers? Or do you prefer this where GW actually has some interactions with everybody? Let me know down in the comments below. We'll keep this conversation going. I really appreciate that. So I hope you have all enjoyed it. I certainly have. I have been Phil the Glacial Geek as always. And until next time, have fun.